Hello, Chris Goeth here. Nice to be back. So we're still continuing with our awareness creation around mental health this month. And so, like you promised, we'll be talking about different types of trauma. So today we're going to talk about three different types of trauma, and the first one is acute trauma. Acute trauma is actually what stems from an event, usually an isolated event that threatens our safety or our sense of safety. For example, a very bad road accident or air accident, whatever kind of an accident that makes life very unpredictable for us. And this often affects how our nervous system predicts, the environment and the world. And so it leaves us stuck in that high state of alertness and always, looking out for either fight or flight. We are constantly in a state of danger. That is acute trauma. And so the main question around acute trauma, especially when dealing with it, is how do I begin to process what happens? So processing what happens is actually the beginning of, trying to address the challenges that actually someone have gone through. So acute trauma. On the other hand, we have acute trauma. We have what is called chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is what happens when we are constantly exposed to traumatic environment. This is a prolonged experience of traumatic environment. For example, someone who is growing up in a very violent home, or someone who is constantly abused by a loved one as a child or even as a grown up. So that constant experience, you are constantly exposed to these traumatic experiences, results into what is called chronic trauma. And the problem with chronic trauma is it puts our nervous system at a point where it has never known what is it like to be in a normal state, in a relaxed state. So it's always on the flight or fight mode. And so the question to deal with there, especially if you want to handle this, is how do I train my system, my body, my mind, my nervous system to relax and to know that life can actually be lived in a more relaxed, balanced space. And of course, with chronic trauma, often you realize there's a lot of power imbalance because if a child is exposed to chronic trauma, it means however is the perpetrator is more powerful. And so that also messes perceptions around relationships and power experiences in relationships. And now, the third traumatic experience or the third experience of trauma is what is called complex trauma. Complex trauma happens when there are multiple different traumatic experiences or events that actually shatters people's world. For example, someone is molested by an uncle, and then the following day they are abused physically by a father, and then the following day they have a bad accident, and then the following day there's this, and then there's a bad teacher. So that multi-layered experience of trauma results into what is called complex trauma. And so complex trauma, in a way, begin to form the core of who we think we are. And so the overriding question, or what must be addressed in that state, is how do I begin to see life differently or redefine myself so that I see life differently than what I've been exposed to all along. So because complex trauma also happens just like the chronic one in an environment that sustains that kind of experience, there's also a power imbalance here. And so the question here is uh, how do I address even the power imbalance? How do we even change the environment so that we're able to deal with this effectively? Now, there's something about trauma that we may need to know. Trauma uh, happens, our systems absorb it, and to an extent, especially if this is happening when someone is a child, we may not even have a chance to deal with that experience. And so we are now grown ups, we are now professionals, we are now fathers and parents and mothers and couples. And these things begin to actually continue to control our lives. Other times without us knowing about them, like being intentionally aware about them, but they have a way of just controlling our system, our minds subconsciously. And therefore, if you are constantly hypersensitive, if you're extremely sensitive, if you are ever scared, if you've accepted an environment that degrades you, that you know, always showing that you are lesser, then you could be having something to deal with around trauma. So that's about trauma. Remember the three core questions with for three different types of trauma. One is, how do I begin to process it? That is a question that must be addressed if you're going to address acute trauma. Number two is, how do I train myself to see life differently? Or how do I train my nervous system to be more relaxed, to be more open, to, not to be on a flight and fight mode all the time? That is what you must address if you're talking about chronic trauma. And then we're talking about complex trauma. You must address another important question, which is, how do I begin to redefine myself and to see life in a different way, not within the parameters of what has been defined for me through the experiences of trauma I've gone through. So let's meet in the next, and I hope you're having and learning a lot, having fun and learning a lot in these sessions.